Hello everyone, this is Major Green, also known as Nitpicking Nerd, and this is a review of episode 11 of the Orville called The New Dimensions. And I will go over the episode and offer my own thoughts. And as always, I will also be talking about similarities with Star Trek, and I can't help do that. I always enjoyed pointing out stuff like that. And I don't think anyone denies the fact that the Orville is heavily inspired by Star Trek, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, by the way. So, in this episode, John Lamarr is being promoted to Chief Engineer, and this immediately reminded me of Geordi LaForge, who in the first season of TNG, he was the pilot of the ship, and when season 2 began, he was suddenly Chief Engineer. It was never really explained, but somewhere in between seasons, he was suddenly promoted to Chief Engineer. So we kind of have the same thing happen here with John Lamarr. Suddenly it's revealed he's super smart and he just doesn't have the ambition and he doesn't really want the responsibility, so he doesn't even want to be promoted, but Kelly for some reason is really pushing him to take more responsibility. She wants him to become the chief engineer. For some reason, maybe she just doesn't want him on the bridge. It's a little bit strange how much she pushes him, especially since the episode began with her giving him a reprimand for something he did, namely a prank on Yaphet, putting a piece of Yaphet in the food, having Bortes eat it. So it's a bit strange that she just gave him a reprimand and now suddenly she wants to give him such an important job. So maybe she just doesn't want to see him on the bridge. But anyway, I kind of find it funny how similar it is to LaForge, and I half expected him to have an accident and go blind in the end of the episode so that he could wear a visor later, which I think would be hilarious, but I guess they would never do that since they don't want to get sued and they are walking a very fine line as it is. There was also an interesting scene talking about money, and this was also kind of similar to Star Trek, in which Picard was always saying there are no material needs anymore, presumably because of the replicator technology, and so he always said money doesn't exist anymore, at least not inside the Federation, and yet we always saw that people still had an ambition. And in Deep Space Nine, they kind of explored that idea more. In one episode, we saw the father of Bashir, and we saw that he always lied about his job, pretending to have an important job in front of strangers. So we do know that there is still a kind of pride and ambition in people. And so I kind of like this scene with Kelly kind of explaining how even though money doesn't exist, people kind of wanting to prove that they are of a higher stature with their job. So even though they don't have actual money. So this was actually better explained here than it was ever explained in Star Trek. They never really explored that concept well in Star Trek, and so they kind of do it here, so I liked it. There was also a discussion on the bridge about getting a pet cat for the bridge, so immediately I thought about Spot, and again I doubt they would actually do that, but I kind of wish they would. And sometimes I do wish this show would be a more direct parody of Star Trek. But on the other hand, because they seek to avoid being too similar, it also forces them to be much more original and come up with newer ideas, which is also good. And speaking of fresh ideas, we see a new species in this episode, which is called the Horribolak. I love that name. And I guess they're kind of like Ferengi were in TNG. Kind of ugly, annoying, stupid, like all the worst possible traits you can think of, all in one species. And they are kind of like smugglers, thieves, so I guess they are kind of like the early Ferengi, but at least they look completely original, completely fresh species, and also their makeup is really great, and the eye area is not real, it's all prosthetics, and they will still move around, you can still see expressions and so on with the eyes and the foreheads, but it's all done with mechanical parts in the mask. So it's actually better than most of the aliens we saw in Star Trek, who mostly were just humans with strange foreheads, and yet here we see much more elaborate masks with moving parts. So this is very impressive, very good effects. There was also a subplot of Ed discovering that he's only a captain because Kelly got the Admiral to give him the command, and I didn't really like that whole subplot. And in general, I think Captain Ed Mercer is kind of an inconsistent character. Like sometimes he's a great captain, sometimes he's a great guy, and sometimes he's just a complete idiot, and sometimes he behaves like a child. And I'd be fine with that if he was an idiot all the time, since it's a comedy show, that would be okay, but it seems that he's really shifting around all the time. So sometimes they say he was the top of his class, and in other times we see that he's a complete total idiot who doesn't know how to do simple things, like he counts numbers with his fingers and stuff like that. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say that he was the top of his class and at the same time show him to be a complete idiot. And because it's a comedy, I often give this show a pass when they do silly stuff, but I do sometimes wish they would have more consistencies. And all the other characters are very consistent and very well developed. I also love the fact that even the minor background characters, they all get developed, like that alien guy with the big head, and Dr. Finn's kids, who are still friends with Isaac. We see them again in this episode. So there is a lot of continuity and a lot of development of all these minor characters. And Yaphet is almost like a main character at this point. We see him in every episode. And by the way, I love him. I love the special effects on him. In Deep Space Nine, we had Odo, who only once in a while we saw his true form, his true shape. Most of the time he was just humanoid. And only we saw small glimpses of him in his natural form. And so having Yaphet here is almost like seeing that special effect of Odo, which we rarely got to see. Now we get to see it all the time. And so he's definitely an eye candy, and so I love him just for that. And also I do think he's funny, and he's almost like a main character at this point because he appears constantly. And I remember when I saw him in the very first episode, I thought it would be his only appearance, that it was just a one-time joke, and yet he came back almost every episode since, and his character also gets developed. And so the same goes for many other minor characters who do get developed. Each small character, we get to know something about him gradually. And just compare that to the many background characters in Star Trek Discovery, none of whom we get to know, and I complained about that in my reviews of that show. They had a whole bunch of interesting background characters who are visually interesting, yet we never get to know anything about any of them. And so on this show it's been done much better. And what I love most in the Orville is the fact that they actually explore true science fiction concepts and ideas. And in this episode they explore the idea of Flatland, two-dimensional space, which is a very interesting idea. And I am a fan of theoretical physics, and I love this idea mainly because it's a good way to explain the idea of higher dimensions to people by using this analogy of imagining a universe of fewer dimensions. And this idea was done in one TNG episode in which the Enterprise encountered the two-dimensional beings, and at first they couldn't even detect them because they were scanning them from the side, and so they couldn't see them, and only when sending a probe up they could actually see them. And by the way, stuff like this is one of the things that I think made the TNG the best Star Trek show, in my opinion, because it always explored all kinds of strange science fiction ideas. And even in the early seasons, which are considered bad, but at least they always encounter those kind of strange stuff, all kinds of strange spatial phenomenons or time loops and stuff like that. So I always found it very interesting because those are actually science fiction ideas. And so here on the Orville also, in almost every episode we see actual science fiction ideas being shown and explored. And so the Orville is not just some drama set in space, but instead it actually explores science fiction ideas, and that's one of the reasons that I love this show. And the idea of a two-dimensional plane of existence was never really shown well in any live action that I remember. And even in that one episode of TNG, it wasn't really done well, it wasn't really shown properly. There was an episode of Futurama that showed this idea very well, but that was an animated show, so I think this is the first time we actually see this idea well in any live action show or movie. However, I do think this idea could have been explored a bit more here. We never actually found out if there were any intelligent beings on that plane. We saw there are some life forms, but they never actually made any contact with them, so we don't even know whether they're intelligent or not, so that's all kind of left unexplored. It would have been more interesting if they managed to communicate with them, or maybe if they got these life forms to help them return to their own space. Instead, we basically just got a quick tour around that place and then out again. So it was nice seeing it all, but I do wish they would have done a little bit more with that. And I also liked it when someone said that maybe there are higher dimensional beings that are watching them all the time also. So this might have been kind of breaking the fourth wall a little bit and maybe referring to us, the viewers, watching them. And this reminds me also in a TNG episode, there was once a scene that kind of did this when Picard talked about the possibility that they are all just part of a holo program running inside a little device sitting on someone's table, referring to the TV, I guess. So that was also kind of breaking the fourth wall, kind of nod to the audience. So this was kind of similar to how they said it here, that maybe there are some higher dimensional beings watching us right now, and so that might have been the same kind of nod to the audience, which is cute. Another similarity with Star Trek, in that scene when they found a way to exit the anomaly, they had to use a shuttle in front of the ship. That also reminds me of a Star Trek episode called In Theory, in which Picard had to pilot a shuttle in front of the ship to help guide it through an anomaly. And here Captain Mercer goes on a shuttle to do something very similar. So maybe that's also something that inspired this episode. So overall a pretty decent episode. I can't say I really like it. I loved some parts of it. I loved the whole part with the two-dimensional beings. That was very well done, and the special effects look great as always. And they actually explored the science fiction idea. I wish they would explore it some more, but at least they had this great idea. I didn't like some of the subplots, like Ed Mercer once again behaving like a child, now crying about being promoted to captain and all that stuff, so that was kind of annoying. So I do find him a little bit annoying at times. And the whole part with Lamarr being promoted against his will is kind of fishy. You just gave him a reprimand and he doesn't even want to get promoted, and yet you're pushing him to be promoted. So it seems like you're just wanting to get him off the bridge at all costs. You don't want to see him on the bridge anymore, so you just want to put him in engineering. So that seems kind of fishy. So I guess we'll wait and see how well it goes later in the series. And the next episode is the final episode of season 1, so Patrick Stewart is rumored to appear. By the way, that idea that I had about what his appearance should be, it probably will not be the case. Based on the preview I saw of next episode, it's probably going to be something else completely, so I can't wait to see it. So let me know what you think, and I will see you next time.